fair bit of where maybe we've got a poppy or rocky sort of type thing and they want strings on it, and we've gone in and recorded strings. The most I've done is 26 strings. I've worked on some stuff that's had 70 odd, but I wouldn't do that because I would feel a bit, because those things, you've got 72 musicians for a start, all getting paid by the hour, and the way it works, you get them for 3 hours. If you go over the 3 hours, they go into big overtime. It's like some musician scale, and it just goes up considerably. So I don't trust myself that if I don't, it's just too much. I don't do it every day. I'd rather go to a studio. I used to use a guy when the old CBS studio, but it's closed now. After CBS, it got renamed to Whitfield Street. And there was a guy there that's been there for years. He was about 60, Mike Ross-Trevor. He'd worked with everybody from Hendrix when he was in London to all sorts. And that's all he does all day long. And it doesn't, he could do an 80-piece in his sleep. It doesn't faze him. So I think, why all the stress and panic? I'll just let him do that day.
Even when you did the 26 instruments, what was the general approach?
The approach, just to be, with orchestras, because of the budget thing and the cost, you make sure you're completely set up before they come in. Not like with a guitarist, we go, hang on a minute, we're just going to get set up. So you have to have 26 chairs, 26 music stands, 26 headphones. So I was there about 3 hours before, making sure that I had 2 assistants that day, making sure that everything's all there ready. We check all our mics, we double check them. And then you sit them up in the relevant position. So from sitting in, when I've worked on music and other people have done the strings, people that really know what they're doing, I've learned that you set them up in the way that they would normally set up for a live performance, and also they go high to low, a bit like a piano keyboard. So you start with your violins, violas, cello, and then basses, go around that way. And you mic them in pairs or groups, and then you record. So if you've got 8 violin players, you'd have them in pairs with 1 mic on each pair, and then you'd probably record all those 4 mics to 1 track, and then you'd do your second violins the same, cello. So you'd probably have 2 first violin, second violin, viola, cello, basses, so 5 tracks, and then you'd either have a stereo pair in the room or an XY pair or something like that at the front of the room, wherever it sounded good as a stereo pair. And a good string engineer will get their sound exactly on the room, so it's a mixture of them in the room with the room itself, and they just record the individual ones as a safety. Or if the arranger says, oh, there's one line we can't hear very loudly, it just means they can turn it up and gives them more control. Oh yeah, you're right, Matthias. So it's always a bit nervy because there's always so much to go wrong, and the way those guys work, they're very union based, so it's a very old school way of doing it, and it's only 3 hours at a time. If they go over, there's that overtime issue. They have to have a 15-minute break in the middle of that, and if they don't, they'll just all stop, and it's kind of, you can't double track them unless you pay them more money. So if they do it and you think, oh, that's great, I'll double track them, if you do it, you've got to pay them 100 and I think it's 120% again. So it's actually, technically, it's cheaper to get them to go and get a second lot to come in, because you're only going to pay them 100% to track it, but obviously you've got the time of doing that, so you're not going to do it. So it's a bit of an issue between record companies and string players.
What about the mixing or editing stage?
The mixing of what? Of orchestral type music, or all music? Pop? Orchestral. Yeah, just that it all sounds natural. What I tend to do is when the string players are playing, I'll wander out into the studio area and have a listen of what that particular setup sounds like. And generally you're in quite a nice room, so it's going to have decent acoustics. So you get an idea of what that sounds like. And then you just try and replicate that in the control room. And the way it generally works is you'll get something that's pretty good, but often the arranger or the producer will have a particular thing that they've focused in on, because it's the way it will work. I don't know how into composition and stuff you are, but each group of violins or violas or cello will have a different line to play. So certain ones will feature in different ways. So you might get up a good balance to your ear, but the arranger might say, well, actually, for this movement in the piece, it needs to have more viola, so can we have a bit more of that there? And you go to their guidance. Same thing, an arranger works with string players all the time. So I will always ask his opinion because he's probably heard more sessions than most. And often you get the string guys in. They have a string leader who's in charge of everyone. So they'll have a run through and I'll record a bit and just check everything's all right. And then I'll say, do you want to just come in and have a listen? And I'll come in and he'll go, that sounds really good. Could we hear a bit more of the room on it or a bit more reverb sometimes or a bit less? And you do it like that. Yeah. Same with drummers. If I record a real drummer, you know, especially if he's a session drummer who's used to playing with a lot of people at a lot of different studios, you know, we might be at a studio I haven't worked at and he might have worked there. So I'll set him up. I might talk to him and say, look, when you've recorded here 3-4 times, where have you got the best results? And he might say, well, they like to put me over there, but I think it sounds better there. And then you sort of gauge what you're going to do. And then I record a bit, get him in to have a listen. And often he'll come in and go, actually, that tom sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? And he said, it's the way it's tuned. And he'll go out and he'll fiddle with his kit. That's the other thing, work from the ground up. If you get it sounding good in the room, especially with drums, the first drum, the first drummer I ever recorded on my own, I'd been assistant on loads of drum sessions, saw how people did it, no problem, hundreds and hundreds. First drummer I recorded was the drummer from Queen in the drum room that Phil Collins did in The Air Tonight. We got the most kick-ass drum sound. It sounded fantastic. I thought, great, I can record drums, brilliant. The next session I did was for, it was a guy that used to be Trevor Horn's engineer, who was now a producer. We got on really well and he'd asked me to come and engineer for him. We went to a room that the Townhouse owned. It wasn't in the same building, but they owned it. The Who used to own it, so The Who did all their records there. I've been there for countless drum sessions, so I knew the room sounded good. I knew all the mics were good. This young band came in. He set up his kit. I went to get my drum sound. It sounded really average. I was devastated. I thought, oh no, it doesn't sound great. And the guy I'm working for is a really great engineer who's just getting into production now. And I'm trying to impress him. It doesn't sound great. What am I going to do? And he came in and he said, what do you reckon? I said, I have to say it's not sounding great. And he had a listen. He goes, let me have a fiddle. And he had a fiddle. And he goes, no. He goes, it's not going to sound any better. And I was a bit shocked. And I said, but the room's really good. And the thing, he said, yeah, the room's really good. He said, but let's go and have a look. We had a look. And he said, look, his kit's not great. We had a little tap. He goes, it's not tuned very well. And he said, you watch when he hits it. Every time he hits the snare, it's in a different place. And it's different velocity. So he said, we can only do so much. Whereas obviously the guy in Queen hits it same place every time, really solid. And so you realise that the drummer and the kit make a big difference. So that's why now, another thing about going to rehearse with a band, you can suss out their equipment. And if the guy's got a horrible amp or his drum kit's rubbish, I worked with one band, he had these little drums. And they were quite poppy, rocky as a band, but his drums were like a little jazz kit. And the reason he had small drums is because the smaller they are, the easier they are to play. Small bass drum, apparently, drummers tell me is much easier to play than a big one, but it doesn't sound anywhere near as good. So I heard it and I just said, that's not going to sound very good. And I said, do you mind if we rent you a kit in? I said, we can rent one, there's a company that rent them in it, especially for recording. And he said, okay, and I could see he didn't tune it very well. So we got the company to bring a kit, beautiful drum workshop kit, nice big drums. The guy tuned it all, set it all up from the company, went off. This guy came in, we got a fantastic drum sound. And halfway through recording, the band turned around and go, God, that kit sounds much better than yours. You know, what, you know, so even they noticed it. So if you get your elements right, but like I was saying before, you know, the guy with the Pro Tools HD and the Neumann, if he doesn't put it in the right place or has it facing the wrong way, you know, there's not a lot you can do. You can turn it up or down. You can't necessarily make it sound fantastic. So if you get the core thing as good as you can get it, then A, you've got less work to do, or B, you can do more with it because you've got a better quality of signal. So, and especially with strings, because you don't want to start having to EQ and compress. You know, you've got 28 strings, you've probably got about 16 mics plus room mics up. You know, that's a lot of things to do, and you go to studios, what do you think you have to worry about is some of these desks now where they're getting a bit old and crackly, you punch an EQ in and it crackles. And if you don't, because with everything else going on and you've got all these musicians and this and you're trying to keep everyone happy and the arranger's there, then there's someone from the union timing it, making sure you don't go over the time, suddenly they all go and you listen in isolation and you hear some crackles. There's nothing you can do about it. You've got to try and lift it from somewhere else and repair it. It's a nightmare.